Section 2. They nestled in together in the dark space humans had found for them in the great empty belly of the ship, a place which echoed fearfully with machinery. They had to use the breathers, first of what might be many discomforts. They tied themselves to the handholds, as humans had warned them they must, to be safe, and Satin hugged Bluetooth Dalhut Hasmi, hating the feel of the place and the cold and the discomfort of the breathers, and most of all, fearing because they were told that they must tie themselves for safety. She had not thought of ships in terms of walls and roofs, which frightened her. Never had she imagined the flights of the ships as something so violent they might be dashed to death, but as something free as the soaring birds, grand and delirious. She shivered with her back against the cushions humans had given them, shivered, and tried to cease. Felt Bluetooth shiver, too. "We could go back," he said, for this was not of his choosing. She said nothing, clamped her jaw against the urge to cry that, yes, they should, that they should call the humans and tell them that two very small, very unhappy downers had changed their minds. Then there was the sound of the engines. She knew what that was, had heard it often, felt it now, a terror in her bones. "We will see great sun," she said, now that it was irrevocable. "We will see Bennett's home." Bluetooth held her tighter. "Bennett," he repeated, a name which comforted them both. "Bennett Jacint." "We will see the spirit images of the Upabove," she said. "We will see the sun." There was a great weight on them, a sense of moving, of being crushed at once. His grip hurt her. She held him no less tightly. The thought came to her that they might be crushed unnoticed by the great power which humans endured, that perhaps humans had forgotten them here in the deep dark of the ship. But no. Downers came and went. Hisa survived this great force, and flew, and saw all the wonders which inhabited the Upabove, walked where they might look down on the stars and looked into the faces of great sun, filled their eyes with good things. This waited for them. It was now the spring, and the heat had begun in her and in him, and she had chosen the journey she would make, longer than all journeys, and the high place higher than all high places, where she would spend her first spring. The pressure eased. They still held to each other, still feeling motion. It was a very far flight. They had been warned so. They must not loose themselves until a man came and told them. The Constantine had told them what to do, and they would surely be safe. Satin felt so, with a faith which increased as the force grew less, and she knew that they had lived. They were on their way. They flew. She clutched the shell which Constantine had given her, the gift which marked this time for her, and about her was the red cloth which was her special treasure, the best thing, the honor that Bennett himself had given her a name. She felt the more secure for these things, and for Bluetooth, for whom she felt an increasing fondness, true affection, not the springtime heat of mating. He was not the biggest, and far from the handsomest, but he was clever and clear-headed. Not wholly. He dug in one of the pouches he carried, brought out a small bit of twig on which the buds had burst, moved his breather to smell it, offered it to her. It brought with them the world, the riverside, and promises. She felt a flood of heat which turned her sweating despite the chill. It was unnatural, being so close to him and not having the freedom of the land, places to run, the restlessness which would lead her further and further into the lonely lands where only the images stood. They were traveling in a strange and different way, in a way that great sun looked down upon all the same, and so she needed do nothing. She accepted Bluetooth's attentions, nervously at first, and then with increasing easiness, for it was right. The games they would have played on the face of the land, until he was the last male determined enough to follow where she led, were not needed. He was the one who had come farthest, and he was here, and it was very right. The motion of the ship changed. They held each other a moment in fear. But this Min had warned them of, and they had heard that there was a time of great strangeness. They laughed, and joined, and ceased, giddy and delirious. They marveled at the bit of blossoming twig which floated by them in the air, which moved when they batted at it by turns. She reached carefully and plucked it from the air, and laughed again, letting it free. "This is where Sun lives," Bluetooth surmised. She thought that it must be so. Imagine Sun drifting majestically through the light of his power, and themselves swimming in it, toward the Upabove, the metal home of humans, which held out arms for them. They joined and joined again, in spasms of joy. After long and long came another change, little stresses at the bindings, very gentle, and by, they began to feel heavy again. "We are coming down," Satin thought aloud, but they stayed quiet, remembering what they had been told, that they must wait on a man to tell them it was safe. And there was a series of jolts and terrible noises, so that their arms clinched about each other. But the ground was solid under them now. The speaker overhead rang with human voices giving instructions, and none of them sounded frightened. Rather, as humans usually sounded, in a hurry and humorless. "I think we are all right," Bluetooth said. "We must stay still," she reminded him. "They will not forget us." "They will not," she said. But she had doubts herself. So dark the place was and so desolate. Just a little light where they were, above them. There was a terrible clash of metal. The door through which they had come in opened, and there was no view of hills and forest now, but of a ribbed throat-like passage which blasted cold air at them. A man came up it, dressed in brown, carrying one of the hand speakers. "Come on," he told them, and they made haste to untie themselves. Satin stood up and found her legs shaking. She leaned on Bluetooth, and he staggered too. The man gave them gifts, silver cords to wear. "Your numbers," he said. "Always wear them." He took their names and gestured out the passage. "Come with me. We'll get you checked in." They followed, down the frightening passage, out into a place like the ship belly where they had been, metal and cold, but very, very huge. Satin stared about her, shivering. "We are in a bigger ship," she said. "This is a ship too." And to the human, "Man, we in Upabove?" "This is the station," the human said. A hint of cold settled on Satin's heart. She had hoped for sights, for the warmth of sun. She chided herself to patience, that these things would come, that it would yet be beautiful.